Why would a Muslim become a Christian? It's a good question. The Quran teaches about sin, just like the Bible. The Quran teaches that there's only one God, just like the Bible. The Quran teaches about heaven. It teaches about hell. It even teaches about Jesus being on the cross, just like the Bible. So again, I have to ask, why would a Muslim become a Christian? Let me share something with you from the Quran that Muslims are commanded to say to Christians and to Jews about their God and their beliefs. Surah 29. We believe in what has been revealed to us and what has been revealed to you. Our God and your God is one, and to him we submit. So the Quran proclaims that Muslims and Christians and Jews all alike worship the same exact God. There's really no difference at the end of the day. My name's Reese. I'm an Arab Christian. I grew up as a Muslim. This is my story as to why I left Islam in the pursuit of Allah, not Jesus, Allah. I grew up in Algeria to a very devout Muslim family. My grandpa would pray 5 times a day. He gave alms. He observed Ramadan. My grandparents, especially my grandmother, were very adamant in teaching me how to read the Quran and how to understand the Quran. They would also allow me to participate in things with them that were part of the 5 pillars of Islam. This included reciting the Shahada. It included praying 5 times a day. It included giving alms. I never went to Mecca, but my grandparents would go to Mecca every single year as opposed to just once in their life. But the greatest thing that they taught me was to seek out what the Quran had to say for myself. Eventually, I moved to the United States with my parents, and I continued to be a Muslim because that's what I had held on to traditionally. As I grew older, I started to feel a deeper hunger to know more about the Quran. Let me share with you some of the fun things that the Quran teaches. Things about history, things about men and women, things about Allah and who He is. Let's start in Surah 18, verse 86. Till when he, the traveler Zul-Qarnayn, reached the setting place of the sun, he found it going down into a muddy spring. The traveler here, Zul-Qarnayn, is Alexander the Great. Apparently, he traveled so far west that he found where the sun sets. Now, we can argue that this is all just poetic writing, and that the Quran doesn't actually mean that he found where the literal sun sets and that it literally sets in a muddy spring. But there's more to this passage. Surah 18 is long, and I won't read the whole entire thing. But what Surah 18 suggests is that Alexander the Great was a Muslim. Historically, we know that that's not accurate because Alexander the Great lived some 1,000 years before the Prophet Muhammad did, and he himself was a Greek pagan. But that's okay. Let's read some more. How about Surah 2, verse 223? Your wives are a tilth for you. Go then into your tilth as you wish, whenever you like. This one doesn't need much explaining. Women are objects of sex. End of story. Oh, speaking of women, in the same chapter here, it states that a woman's testimony is half of that of a man's. Why? Well, according to the Quran, it's because of the deficiency in a woman's mind. So Allah not only created women to be objects of sex, but He also created them to be stupid. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Both the Quran and the Bible have a most influential figure. In the Quran, it's the Prophet Muhammad. In the Bible, it's Jesus Christ. These most influential figures act as the prime example of how their followers ought to live and act. So Muhammad is the prime example for all Muslims on how they ought to conduct themselves. And then Jesus Christ is the prime example for all Christians on how they ought to conduct themselves. So let's take a look at the difference between those two characters. So let's start in Surah 8, verse 12. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve, This is Allah speaking to Muhammad, and then Allah gives Muhammad instructions for himself. Therefore, strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them. Surah 9, verse 5. Again, this is Allah speaking to Muhammad. Slay the unbelievers wherever you find them. Take them captives and besiege them and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Surah 66, verse 9. Again, Allah speaking to Muhammad. O Prophet, strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and be hard against them. Finally, let's take a look at Sahih Bukhari. Quick explanation here. Sahih Bukhari is a continuation of the Quran. It documents more of the things that Muhammad did. So this is like the Gospel of John compared to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's overall the same story, but it goes into other details about the things that Jesus did that may not necessarily be found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But overall, the story is still the same. Sahih Bukhari is just like that when it comes to the Quran. Let's take a look here at Sahih Bukhari 52, verse 44. A man came to Allah's apostle, that's Muhammad, and said, instruct me as to such a deed as equals jihad in reward. A man comes to Muhammad and says, Muhammad, is there anything that is as good as jihad that I could possibly do to get a reward in heaven? Now, for those of you that don't know, jihad is committing atrocities in the name of Allah. It's commonly referred to as holy war by Muslims, but the actions of jihad mean committing atrocities in the name of Allah in hopes to reap a reward in heaven. So let's look at Muhammad's answer here. Muhammad replied, I do not find such a deed that is equal to jihad. So the greatest accomplishment you could possibly achieve as a Muslim is to commit horrendous atrocities in the name of Allah, including beheading people, dismembering them, and just killing people in general. However, there is one piece of silver lining in all of this. It's found in Surah 5. O people of the book, you have no ground to stand on until you observe the law of the Torah and the gospel, and what has been revealed to you from your Lord. According to this verse, it's the Bible that has the final authority and final say over the Quran. It's the Bible that validates the Quran. So much so that Muslims have no ground to stand on unless they read the Torah and the gospel. Well, if that's what the Quran says, then that's what I'm going to do. At this point, I'm 19 years old. I'm a third-year college student studying biology. And in my spare time, I'm reading the Bible. Do you remember how I said that Muslims see Muhammad as the pinnacle and the ultimate example of how they should conduct themselves and their lives? And that Jesus Christ is the same way to Christians? Well, let's take a look at some of the teachings and actions of Jesus Christ. Let's start in Matthew chapter 5. Verse 43 says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Let's stop right there. This is a very familiar concept. In fact, if you're a Muslim, this makes perfect sense. For somebody who is a fellow Muslim like you're to treat them with love and respect. But somebody who is an unbeliever, you are to strive hard against them, just like we read in the previous surahs. So far, so good. But Jesus Christ completely changes the narrative here. Matthew 5, verse 44. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends his rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same thing? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do the same thing? Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. God causes the sun to rise on both the good and the evil. He causes the rain to fall on both the good and the evil. This is describing God's common grace. God gives common grace to all men. Therefore, if we strive to be like God, but we only give our common grace, such as greeting or loving somebody, if we only give our common grace to people that we love and not the people that don't love us, what good does that do? If we then are created in God's image and we are striving to be like God, shouldn't we also act like God? And if God gives common grace and love to all men, shouldn't we do the same exact thing? What Jesus is trying to teach here is that if you want to be in the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of heaven has to be in you. If you want to dwell with God, you have to be like God. And God is a God of grace. So how does that compare to the Quran? The Quran teaches that the greatest thing a man can do is commit atrocities or jihad in the name of Allah in order to reap their reward in heaven. The Bible, however, teaches that the greatest thing a man can do is be like his Father in heaven. And if God gives grace to all men, you must do the same. Love your enemies. Give grace to those who oppose you, because it's God's grace that's keeping you alive today. Over the next several months, I continued to study out the teachings of Jesus. I began to go to various Bible studies to learn more about his teachings and to mostly understand his parables because I was having a hard time comprehending them. I found 2 Christian men who took me under their wing and began to teach me more and more about the parables of Jesus and other biblical concepts that were truths. On December 12th, 2010, I finally decided to commit my life to Jesus Christ. After years of seeking Allah and who He is, I came to the end of that road. At the end of that road was the cross of Jesus Christ. And little did I know that that would actually be the beginning of life, where Jesus died for us. The 2 young men who were discipling me took me through various verses on baptism. God used them in such a way that I immediately recognized the significance of not just the cross, but the significance of repentance and what it means to give my life to Christ. And so when I gave them my confession that I had put my faith in Jesus, and they started explaining baptism to me, I knew immediately what I had to do, and that was to not wait. I believed in Jesus. Therefore, I was baptized. So a few days after I was baptized, I went home to my family and I confessed my new faith to them. Out of respect for them, I'm not going to go into detail as to what happened, but you can use your imagination when I say that there were death threats. It was quite violent. And as a matter of fact, one of my family members looked at me and said, "I'm your God." To which I replied, "No, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior." I left home. I had lost my family, but I had gained eternity with the one true God. Years later, my family reached out to me again, and they wanted to reconcile our relationship. I'll admit, I'm human. I didn't take kindly to that message at first, but after considering Jesus' words again, when he said, "Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who persecute you," I thought, if I'm going to follow in the steps of Jesus Christ, I'm going to forgive my family, I'm going to have a relationship with them, and for the sake of them, Lord willing, someday coming to Jesus Christ themselves, I'm going to set myself as an example to do the things that Jesus did himself and told me likewise that I should do.